David here with Figboot on Pens, back again with another review. Today I have for you another ink review. I've had a few lately that I needed to catch up on. Today's is a bit different. It is an ink in addition to something a bit special. It's an offering from the New Orleans-based Papier Plume, which will be released at the upcoming DC Pen Show. Speaking of this year's show, if you are attending on Saturday at 11 a.m., I will be giving an hour-long seminar where I will be discussing creating reviews, fountain pen social media, as well as having some Q&A. The seminar is free to attend, and if you are going to be at the show, I would love to see you. If you are familiar with the layout of the show, I believe the seminars and workshops will be downstairs, directly below the main ballroom. Last year, during the hotel's renovations, that area was used for vendors. But this year, with renovations complete, those vendors will be elsewhere on the main floor. I'll be interested to see what the overall layout looks like with all of the work on the hotel being complete. Okay, we are here today to talk about an ink, and that would be Papier Plume's Rebirth. As I mentioned, it will be released at the DC show, and the unique thing about this ink is that it was created in conjunction with a local New Orleans artist by the name of Tony Hollums. Tony has an extensive background in art and architecture, as well as music and audio engineering, and he fuses all of those interests together into his creations. I'll put a link to his site in the notes below, but here are a few examples of his work. This piece is called Cello. You really could see the music coming to life here. I like this piece. It's called Compression, and I think his audio engineering experience plays into this piece. Tony uses fountain pen ink to outline his work. He does so with a fountain or a dip pen. Then he fills in the watercolor with a brush. Here's a neat representation of the periodic table. And then this is a piece in his Thoughts series called Running With It. He does some really interesting work. Tony was very involved in the creation process and the selection of this specific color, as well as the name. When you purchase this ink, you can buy just the ink, or you can also include a special print from Tony called, appropriately enough, Rebirth. It's a nice addition to the ink, and I think it looks nice as well. Okay, that's enough talk. Let's actually get to the ink. And in order to do so, please join me over here at camera 2. To begin with, I wanted to give you a closer look at this print. It's actually really nice. I like the colors on it, which are the ink that is the Rebirth ink. We have this band playing here and the music going out, and then the audience. Just the detail here on these band members I like, and just like the sound waves going out, and think that it's a nice overall print. This is what the Papier Plume bottles look like. They do a nice job with their labels. And you can see that this is Rebirth. And then also, I've always really liked how they dip the tops in wax there. And I always like these drips coming down. I always think that's kind of cool. So this is Papier Plume Rebirth. It's a nice kind of coppery brown. In regard to some other colors, this is what it looks like with Papier Plume 11, which was their Stranger Things themed ink, which I really like. This is with Monteverde's Pumpkin Cake. Here it is with Diamine's Ancient Copper. And then finally, it's a very close match to Diamine's SBRE Brown. This is what the ink looks like on some 52-gram Tomoe River paper. You can see here that this is a Q-tip swab test, and then this is more of a smear, and then this is a drop test. You can see with just the normal Q-tip under normal use, there's just a very small amount of shading to it, a very small amount of sheen. You get a little bit more shading and sheen when you have a stronger application, and then eyedropping where it's really thick, you're just going to get a lot of that darker color. But under normal use, it's just a nice kind of a coppery golden brown. So here we have Papier Plume's Rebirth. Here at the top, I use a 3.8 millimeter Pilot Parallel, which is good for that kind of thing. We have a number of passes here. You can see it gets a little bit darker. This is Rhodia 80-gram paper. I say that the ghosting and bleed is rather low. You can see here that there's not much on the other side of the paper. The shade, I'd say, is medium depending on how much you are applying, and then the sheen is low as well. In regard to the pens, I have 3 pens that I'm going to be using today. And the first one is from Nakaya, and that is a dorsal fin number 2, or a dorsal fin 2. They call it the dorsal fin 2 because on a dorsal fin 1, it only has the fin on top, and on the 2, it has it on both the barrel and the cap. So we have a Nakaya dorsal fin 2. And this is, we'll call it a hard medium. It's a medium nib, but it writes pretty much more like a fine nib. And then in regard to the other pens for the writing sample, I have 2 pens that were actually produced by Papier Plume. And the first one was a collaboration with the Herbert Pen Company, which is the Wetland Cypress. This has one of the coolest clips, which is like taken from a topographical map of a river. And so I just think it's really cool. And they work with another local New Orleans artist in order to create that. Papier Plume does a good job of working with local artists in their area. And so for the medium nib, we have, we'll call it the Papier Plume Wetland Cypress. And that would be a medium nib. And finally, for a more thicker nib, we have a collaboration between the Heinz Pen Company, Papier Plume, and Stylo's Suite, which was a pen they put out a while back called the Blues. And this has a nice flex nib on it. I do have a review of this pen on my channel. It's no longer in production. It was sold out, but it's something that is very nice. So we have the Papier Plume the Blues. And you're going to be able to get like lots of line variation on that one. You have to kind of, to start with, go a little bit slow to get it going. But then once you do, you can get some nice variation out of there. So in regard to the writing sample, I thought I would talk a little bit about the ink itself. So here we go with the Nakaya Dorsal Fin 2. I said that one of the main ideas behind this ink was to help people open their minds to different ways you can use fountain pen ink, which in this particular case is used artistically. Then in regard to the Wetland Cypress, said here that the name Rebirth was chosen because of the rusty brown, orange, red color, as well as a tribute to the Rebirth Brass Band, which is a famous local New Orleans band that has been kind of an institution in the area since the early 1980s. So then finally for the blues, and I said, when you purchase this ink, you can also include a special print, which I've showed you a couple of times from Tony, called Rebirth. In regard to flow, I think it's a medium flow, and drying time, it's between 15 and 30 seconds, depending on what nib you use, or actually both on medium fine as well as medium. In regard to a water test, this ink does not profess to be waterproof, but let's go ahead and put some water on there. And while that sits, let's take a look at some chromatography. I always think it's interesting to see how these turned out. And I thought this one was interesting because there was kind of some more greens and blues and pinks than I had imagined. This is what the chromatography ended up taking a look at. Like I said, there was a little bit more kind of in the lighter greens than I anticipated, and some blues and pinks and yellows, orange, and then finally some reds there. In regard to that waterproof test, yeah, it didn't hold up very well, but like I said before, it doesn't profess to be a waterproof ink. In the bottom here, I said Papier Plume Rebirth is a nice copper brown and has a goal of expanding your mind in regard to the uses of fountain pen ink. This pen, or this ink, is going to be debuted at the DC Pen Show, and then if they have any extra available, then the next week it'll be available on the Papier Plume site. I believe a bottle of ink is $10, and then if you want it with the print, then it is $40. So even if you just get the ink, I think this is a solid brown, kind of coppery brown ink. It's something that I enjoy. And then on top of that, it's a unique print made with the actual ink itself, which I think is a nice addition in this package. Okay, until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.